With all the fear and frenzy surrounding AI, how do you cut through the hype to find what actually works? We're moving past the buzzwords to look at the data that actually matters. I'm Jack Newton, and welcome back to Matters. For this episode, I'm joined by two of the most forward-thinking voices in the legal industry, Jacqueline Schafer, founder and CEO of Clearbrief, and Damien Riehl, solutions champion at Clio. We also explore why AI isn't just about speed, but about freeing lawyers to be more human, empathetic counselors. Here's my conversation with Jacqueline and Damien. Jackie, Damien, thanks for joining us this morning. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're gathered here in Chicago, in the Wicker Park neighborhood. Super cool to be here in Chicago with both of you. And I'd love to hear, just to start with introductions, maybe Clearbrief and VLEX, what you do at those companies. I think it'd be a great way to kick off our conversation.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's great to be here. So I'm Clearbrief's founder and CEO. I'm a career litigator. I started out in big law in New York, spent a lot of years in government, doing appellate work, complex litigation. And I was also in-house counsel. So like really in the trenches for, a decade before I founded Clearbrief in 2020. And Clearbrief is a Microsoft Word add-in. It interacts with your Word documents and keeps any evidence that you're referencing visible. You can create timelines and summaries and then check over everything before filing and ultimately share it with the court. So we're used, across the AM law by the largest, global law firms and as well as the, smallest solo law firms, courts, government agencies, and in-house teams. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Terrific, Damien.
I'm Damien Riehl. I work with VLEX. If you know Fastcase, you know VLEX. We merged a couple of years ago. I've probably, my title is VP Solutions Champion, which is a made-up title for a made-up job. But I think it might be the best job in legal tech where I build in the morning. This morning, literally, I was speaking with my product team and we were building. And then I talk about the stuff I built in the afternoon. That is, I talk to customers. And as the customers say, you should really build this new thing, then the next morning I build the new thing. So VLEX has 1 billion legal documents. That is cases, statutes, regulations, motions, briefs, pleadings, orders, 1 billion of those. And we are using large language models to both extract the data from those legal documents and then be able to do the generative items. Draft me a new complaint, draft me a new answer. So we really, you need, I'd like to think of it as public oil, and we need to refine that oil with large language models. And thankfully, that's what we get to do at VLEX.
Amazing. And we're going to talk a lot about AI and your particular takes on AI. But before we do that, I'd love to just kind of root ourselves in the location we're in Chicago, which is obviously a really special place, I think, to all three of us. One of the hubs of legal tech innovation, home of ABA Tech Show, home of the ABA, obviously lots of important legal developments in Chicago over the years. What makes Chicago a special place for you? May I start with you, Jackie?
Yeah, so I'm a jazz musician. So, the first time I ever came to Chicago, we went to some of the oldest or like historic jazz clubs. And so I'll always like associate that with Chicago. And I just love, the history here.
I love Chicago for lots of reasons. Well, one of the reasons is my house is in Minnesota. So, of course, whenever somebody says, when I'm speaking to London people or Brazilian people, I say, no, I'm Chicago time. Right. So we are Midwesterners through and through. And it's also a 1-hour flight from my house. So that's, between going to the West Coast and the East Coast, it's much easier to go to Chicago. But it's got such a good vibe. It's the people are, rough and tumble, kind of like New York, but they're also Midwestern in the way that they're polite. So anyway, Chicago's a great place. Tech Show is amazing. Yeah, there's lots of really good reasons to be in Chicago.
Special place in my heart is where we launched Clio way back in 2008. That was my very first ABA Tech Show. Such a warm reception there, such a great community. So, and I love the city. Amazing architecture, great food. It's a city I look forward to coming at least a handful of times a year.
I love that photo of you at the first tech show where you're just at the booth looking.
Me and Ryan,
Very
tucked away in
lights.
some dark corner of the Chicago Hilton at that point. And I think we were probably one of the last registrants to sign up for a booth. So I think we got the booth in a dark corner by the washroom, but enough people found us. It was great. We actually managed to generate some traffic.
And you haven't changed a bit. That photo looks exactly the
same. Yeah, exactly. It looks very similar to the booth this week. Yeah. So I think we're at a really interesting moment in the evolution of AI and AI adoption in legal, where we really, I think, moved past the the hype phase. You are both really in the trenches of what real applied AI looks like on a day-to-day basis, what the practical applications are, what the limitations of AI are, and maybe what the future holds as well. So I'd love to really do a deep dive on this topic with both of you. And starting off with you, Jacqueline, if we could maybe do a bit of a deep dive in terms of what you're seeing as the most high impact applications of AI, where you're seeing daily value being driven, and maybe some of the limitations where you see this is at the frontier, maybe not where we're quite at, but what could be next in terms of AI applications for legal.
Yeah. So the way that I've been thinking about this is actually through how we've reimagined our user interface, our UI of our product. So we released a new UI about a month ago, and it was the result of a lot of conversations I've been having with our customers. And I mentioned we have customers, at all different size practices, all different practice areas. And one of the things that we heard was a lot of frustration with very open-ended tools and feeling like, what do you want to do today? They don't know how to do prompting very well, and there's a lot of concern about that. So the one of the focus areas that we have of how we're positioning Clearbrief is with the writing workflow for litigation and investigations. So in those practice areas, you're always going to sort of start with a bunch of factual documents. You're going to have to search them, organize them, make sense of them. Then you're going to turn that into your facts section. And then ultimately, if you have legal research, we're not a legal research tool, but you're going to incorporate that. And then you're going to check everything over. And so that checking everything over part has become a huge increasing focus with all of the news about hallucinations and sanctions. Actually, that there was, that recent case in Wyoming that has really had an impact. One of the largest, personal injury law firms. Not only did the associate attorney who drafted that pleading get sanctioned, but the supervising attorney, the partner, and also the cooperating counsel who, had nothing to do with it actually writing the brief. They all got sanctioned. So that last step of the workflow of checking everything over.
And that brief was a case of hallucinated cases and citations that were not vetted properly.
Exactly. They had the associate had used an internal AI tool that hallucinated case law, and nobody had thoroughly, checked it over before it got filed. So, yeah, so I think that's still that fear of hallucinations is really prominent. So when we were, redesigning the UI, we're trying to keep all these things in mind of like, okay, grounding the user when they open it up to understand how they're going to use these tools, to make it really clear and show them this is how you check over this work product. And also one of our core features really highlighting that whenever you're creating work product in Clearbrief, whether you're using our generative AI tools or our sort of classic search tools, you can always see that hyperlinked source inside Word, right? So it splits the screen in Word. So I think that's really, the trend, I guess, that I'm speaking to is grounding the user and what they're doing and why they're using this tool. And then also just reminding them that they need to check things over and helping them facilitate that to ease the anxiety.
Yeah. And in creating affordances for making that checking easy and almost an expected part of the workflow.
Exactly, because it is getting more and more challenging with the models getting better and better. Deep research, in particular, if folks have been experimenting with that, it does sound so authoritative. It's mostly really, really strong, and then it makes it even harder if you're not as diligent about checking over every statement, every fact, every piece of evidence. So we're sort of like shove it in their face, put the evidence there. You can't not look at it, and then. I don't know if I clarified this, but when you share the document with, the partner, your colleague, or your cooperating counsel, they can also see the sources.
Right.
So they don't worry that they're going to be on the front page of the New York Times.
Right. So AI can help you generate these citations, help you assimilate a large amount of documents, but then leaves you with the paper trail to cite where certain claims and certain references relate to.
Exactly. And I think what I've been realizing is you do really need the AI tools that we've built from the beginning that are classic natural language processing and sort of machine learning tools. They're not generative AI tools for checking over, identifying, oh, this text fragment, this is a citation. That type of AI is really helpful and useful for checking over the other type of AI, which is generative.
Right. Exactly.
So it's kind of like Barney on The Simpsons, where It's like beer, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. It's like you need AI to to solve for the potential issues that could be created with AI.
Yeah, exactly. David, would love to hear from you on the topic.
If we think about the Gartner hype cycle, and I gave a talk with Pablo Arredondo, who I met actually in Chicago here at Legal Tech, Tech Show, Legal Tech 2016, 2017. But Pablo and I gave a co-keynote, and we talked about the Gartner hype cycle. And you go up to the peak, you go to the trough of disillusionment, and then you ultimately end up in the slope of enlightenment. He argued that we're kind of on the slope of enlightenment. We've already gone through the trough. And then I looked at the sea of lawyers we were talking with, and I thought, a lot of these people haven't even gotten up to the peak yet. They don't even know enough to go to the trough to be able to be the slope. So it made me think about, we all talk about the Gartner hype cycle. Where are we? And I think it's an individual journey.
Yes.
That is the solo small lawyers in a much different place than Pablo and I and anyone here is. So I think as we talk about AI, we should not assume that we're on the slope, but assume that we need to take people where they are right now. And so when we think about hallucinated cases, hallucinated facts, Jackie does an amazing job with the product to be able to say, here are the facts that matter. And we at VLEX we're blessed to have 1 billion legal documents that is the cases that matter. So if you have yesterday's case, you're not going to hallucinate yesterday's case because we have Smith v. Jones, which was decided yesterday. And we know that Smith v. Jones overturned this other case. So we know that we have a citator to do that work. All that citated work is done with symbolic AI, not large language model AI, but good old fashioned AI that we've been building over the last 10 years. And so the rate of hallucination is pretty close to zero, if not zero. And so I think that the winners in this game will be connecting that symbolic AI, that is the good old fashioned AI, with large language model AI. And those together will reduce the rate of hallucinations through something that your listeners might know about, retrieval augmented generation. You need to be able to retrieve the documents that matter. And then with that corpus of cases, statutes, regulations, and facts from the evidence, you put those two things together to retrieve and then augment and then generate. That augment side, the A of the reg, is the symbolic AI. That is this a breach of contract case? Is this a patent infringement case? Is this a negligence case? Each of those needs to be tagged up with symbolic AI, and symbolic AI, therefore deterministic, therefore reliable. Large language models aren't reliable for the reasons that but symbolic AI is totally reliable. So taking that symbolic AI, tagging them up, and then with good old fashioned AI, and then using a large language model to say, now here are all the negligence cases in this jurisdiction with facts like mine, and then the rate of hallucination goes close to zero. That's something that we are seeing in the slope of enlightenment, that even the people, solo smalls, maybe aren't even at the peak. They should be thinking about that even as they go through the trough of disillusionment on their way to the slope of enlightenment.
I think it's really interesting, by the way, both of you have been in AI, excuse me, in AI and machine learning before the generative AI era. So you've approached these problems for years using, what you call old fashioned AI, but what was cutting edge just a few years ago, but call it classic machine learning. And as you pointed out, Damien, these are much more reliable, predictable algorithms that have more deterministic outcomes and are less good at bullshitting than LLMs are.
Right.
I'm curious, is your perspective, when you think about that slope of, when you think about that Gartner hype cycle, when you think about that curve, it's also a function of the tools you're using. Because if you're using, the case you cited, Jacqueline, around the hallucinations and using an internal tool that is maybe just a wrapper around OpenAI or GPT-4, whatever the case might be, those tools will have a certain set of limitations as compared to a custom design tool from VLEX that you may never go into that trough of disillusionment because they're engineered to help you avoid some of those pitfalls.
That's right. And if you think about it, like every time I talk to a lawyer that says, I've used ChatGPT and it's not quite there yet, I say, what version of ChatGPT did you use? Oh, out of the free version. Oh, that's like a really bad version that doesn't have cases, doesn't have statutes. Of course that's going to hallucinate. Of course it's going to be not there yet. So they're going to be in the trough of disillusionment, where if you hand them Vincent and upload a complaint and it gives you 200 pages of analysis with non-hallucinated cases, non-hallucinated statutes, gives you defenses to the complaint, gives you strategies to be able to answer that complaint, they're going to say, my God, this is peak hype, right? Not just peak hype, this is actually doing the thing I need to do because I'm using the right tool for the job.
Right.
So when people say ChatGPT isn't quite there yet, I'm like, yeah, because you're using the wrong tool for the job.
Right.
It's like this wrench doesn't hammer very well. Of course not, because it's a wrench. Use a hammer. use a tool for the job. And you're going to see that, my God, these things are much better than they have been in the past. And this is the worst the technology will be. And if you use the right tool for the job, the hype cycle almost solves itself. You're going to see an amazing tool, and we're just going to keep getting better.
One point I want to add to that is that it's really helpful to shape the user's experience so that you're sort of showing them which tools are best for which task. And I think that's where, like you said, if you're sort of using this chat GPT, whatever's free, whatever, you're just, throwing stuff at the wall, you're not necessarily going to get this outcome that makes you excited about continuing on your AI journey. I think that's where a lot of lawyers stumble. So the more that the user experience of the product can really curate, okay, you're trying to do this task. We've already solved the, data pipeline aspects of this. I'll just give you a very, basic example, which was I was hanging out with my sister-in-law, and she was trying to organize some of her bank statements to send to an accountant. And I was like, oh, let's use ChatGPT and I'll show you. Let's do some prompting together. And, we got a prompt going. But we were getting out this spreadsheet, but the issue was it couldn't extract the data from her particular bank's PDFs. And so the spreadsheet just had very piecemeal data, and it was mostly blank, and it wasn't a good experience. And I think that's kind of just a classic way that when you're using a tool that's built for legal, that first step of being able to scan and OCR, make text searchable that data. So at this point, in Clearbrief's journey, we've encountered probably, every, I won't say every type, but a lot of, different diverse data types, all sorts of medical records and bank statements and transcripts and condensed transcripts and all of that work that goes into just that pre-processing of the data. That's not the generative AI step necessarily. And the generative AI, in order to work well, that step has to be successful.
Right. Exactly. And I think you both raise a great point, which is we're maybe doing ourselves a disservice as an industry, even talking about AI as an umbrella term and not being more specific in what we're talking about. I mean, in a way, it's almost like, talking about or using the cloud or using technology in your law firm. AI takes so many different forms. If you're a practicing lawyer today, I know one thing a lot of lawyers are struggling with today is, how do they put their arms around what the actual practical applications of AI are? What, if you looked at a law office and made recommendations to a lawyer today and just, hey, here's 3 or 4 things you should absolutely be leveraging AI for in your day-to-day to be competitive in today's market. What would those things be? What would you recommend? Maybe we'll start with you, Damien.
Sure. I think the word generative AI throws people off because yes, it does generate things, but it also extracts things. So as we think about it, you're a solo small lawyer. What can I do? Often people think about generating, but you should also say, I want to pull from these documents the things that matter from these documents. And
Summarize documents.
Summarizing them, right?
Documents.
That is extracting from the documents, not
Exactly.
necessarily. So that's the retrieval augmented generation, the retrieval side, the pulling. That's something we underestimate. So I think that being able to pull the things out from your corpus of facts, from the corpus of cases, statutes, and regulations, pull everything that matters from the document, and then reason with those things. I think that everything a lawyer does is text-based. We ingest text, we analyze text, and we output text. And large language models do all 3 of those things at a superhuman speed and at a postgraduate level. It beats PhDs in their field with the questions that. So if you think about, I want to extract everything that matters in the way that I've been extracting everything that matters for the last 40 years of my practice. Once you think about it that way, you could say, my gosh, what are the possibilities? What can I do now that I can extract at superhuman speed, analyze at superhuman speed, and then do the output at superhuman speed, and maybe do the first draft? It shouldn't be the last draft, but it's a much better first draft than maybe a first-year associate or a third-year associate, or maybe even a fifth-year associate. And as the technology gets better, maybe the first draft is better than I would do myself.
We've all seen the boxes of documents lined up for discovery, and as he's pointed out, generative AI can sift through reams of documents, megabytes or gigabytes of text in seconds, and do it in a pretty flawless way. So that's one, I think, great example of table stakes applications of AI. What about you, Jacqueline?
Yeah, so there's probably 3 core things that every practice, I feel like you should not be doing this manually. The first is our most popular generative AI tool is our, it's called Instant Hyperlinked Timeline. We were actually the first to release a timeline tool. We patented it, and we have an issued patent. Works really, really well. And so you can just dump in those, tons and tons of documents, press a button. We have 2 separate options for a medical timeline because, like I was saying, there's different, sort of plumbing you have to
Mhm,
set up to
mhm.
get good results with certain kinds of data. And then we have our classic timeline. It will then just work and create a timeline for you in your Word document with every date, a description of what happened on that date that's tailored to be extremely bland and faithful to the evidence, and then that hyperlinked citation column so you can see the source and it will highlight where the information came from. I feel like that's the gateway drug for generative AI when someone who is very hesitant, and I can say this from experience working with, we also partner with the American Arbitration Association. So we're working with, the most senior, they're retired judges, people who have had long careers in the law, haven't been using a ton of this sort of newer technology necessarily. That is such a instant gratification for them to understand the value of generative AI. And then the other two things I wanted to mention are literally just the table of authorities tool. Again, that one's not generative AI. That's classic AI. Click a button. It knows exactly what cases you cited. It makes your table of authorities. Just why are you doing this manually? And then
Yeah.
the last step is the hyperlinking. And this is, I think, something so important in this age where trust is at a premium, because I have had customers tell me, a wonderful solo firm where he was representing kids who were unlawfully imprisoned at the border, and he won a huge verdict for these kids. And he said it was because of that hyperlinking. And he actually said he only hyperlinked one case that had a similar damages analysis that he wanted the judge to see. But we have this way in Clearbrief, you sort of press a button, it knows, the law. We actually integrate with Fastcase VLEX, also with LexisNexis, so you can see that case. And so he used that tool to send the hyperlinked pleading or brief to the judge. And the judge's ability to see that evidence is so powerful. And he won, I think it was like a $1.5
Wow.
million verdict.
And really this, you've really acknowledged that trust but verify is really the biggest thing. To be able to say, this is the ground truth facts that you're pulling from your corpus. This is the ground truth case from the table of authorities that I can do this. Trust is at a premium, as you say. And trust but verify is, I think the winners in this game will make trust but verify dead simple for the end user.
Exactly.
Within our system on the right-hand side, there is the actual non-hallucinated case and the actual non-hallucinated text from that case. And that non-hallucinated text will be non-hallucinated 100% of the time. Not 90, not 95, not 99, but literally 100%. Because, and you might say, Damien, I know about large language models. How can you say 100% rather than 99? And I can say 100% because it's not created by a large language model. It's a database search. Like we've been doing database searches for the
Right.
last 40 years. So that trust but verify, you have the ground truth case right here. So now I can go here and Leo Mergel from Salesforce, he heads legal operations. He said he doesn't like trust but verify. He said when people use Vincent, they look at this and they say, my God, this text from this case answers my question. And then the next time they trust it a bit more and they trust it a bit more. So he said this is a virtuous cycle that turns it from trust but verify to trust and verify. That's a virtuous cycle. So as you use your tool, you're going to trust the system more because you know that it's ground truth, and our system as well. And I think the winners in this game will make trust but verify into trust and verify.
Mhm.
But shouldn't we already have been doing this? I'm just thinking back to when I was a first year associate, in big law. It was my job I was the person we would not file a document unless you looked at every single citation, the facts and the law, and made sure it said exactly what we were claiming it said. And I think that's why, it definitely inspired me in starting my company. And, the tool that we built, it actually flags for the user with a score where the source doesn't support what they said. So anyway, I always think back to, like, hopefully we're helping the anxiety that lawyers, associates, paralegals, anyone feels when they're trying to get something filed and they have to check it over. And maybe the whole industry is starting to realize this isn't a nice to have to check things over. It is
Right.
part of your ethical duties.
Absolutely. And just, whether it was a junior associate producing the work or your AI assistant producing the work, you need to check the work and you need to stand behind the work you're producing. And that sounds so obvious, you shouldn't need to say it. But I think in virtually all of the cases where we've seen lawyers kind of fall on the wrong side of how they're leveraging AI, and in some cases facing sanctions for it, it's as simple as not checking the work.
That's right. And I think about my career. I started in a solo small insurance defense firm. And so this is all in the context of insurance companies saying you're going to spend less time on this brief than ever. So checking on the stuff is at a premium because, if I'm not going to get paid to check on it, I'm disincentivized from checking it. So cost pressure from insurance companies, all the way up to the biggest law firms I worked for. There's always a cost pressure to do things faster, better, stronger. So we're cost pressure coming down. We're kind of offering tools, all three of us, to be able to say, even with cost pressure coming down, you can trust and verify in a way that you had in the past. But in the past, it took hours. With us, it takes minutes. We're going to help you help yourselves and not be sanctioned by the courts.
And do you think you made a comment around getting very close to zero hallucinations? Do you think do we asymptote at something that is close to zero but not zero, or do you think there's a world in the future where there's no hallucinations and we can just trust and maybe not even verify that the AI is just going to do the work and do it 100% reliably?
Yeah, so we have right now, like, I said 100% of the time, this ground truth case text will be ground truth. So that's today 100% of the time, not an asymptote, but is actually not approaching 100%, but is
It's
at
100%.
100%. And then going forward, then we have the large language model generated things that are here, and that they're hallucinatory things that even if you have the ground truth text, sometimes it gets wrong, and that will asymptote to pretty close to zero for one large language model. But you can imagine within VLEX, within Vincent, we actually have model number 1 building it. And then we have model number 2 validated, much like an associate drafts it, the partner validates the associate. So we already have 2 methods, and that pushes the asymptote closer to zero. But imagine now, as large language models get cheaper, have a 3rd validate, and maybe a 4th as it gets cheaper, or 100, right? So as you do that, then you get pretty close to, if not to 100% validity. And so I think that, yeah, today you can have the ground truth on this side and pretty close to this, and we just keep getting closer to closer. And we've probably already exceeded what humans can do. There are a lot of studies, summarization is almost dead is the name of a paper, that they did a double-blind study where they said to humans, summarize this document, and then they said to the machine, summarize this document, mixed it up, gave it to a human reviewer, and the human reviewers said that the machines hallucinated less than the humans. That is, the humans made more errors than the machines. That was a study from 2023. And the tech has gotten way better in the last 2 years. So the real question is it better than what? Better than humans? We were already there 2 years ago. And that asymptote is getting closer to zero, which is doing superhuman work at superhuman speed.
Right. It's an important point because sometimes we talk about perfection being the ideal, and I think we've seen that trap the way sometimes people talk about self-driving cars, right? Do self-driving cars need to always avoid fatalities or collisions? But the bar should really be not 100% avoidance of collisions or fatalities, but are you doing better than the average human driver? And at that point, we should be all in on self-driving cars.
That's right.
Let's zoom out a little bit and think about the future. So, as you pointed out, things are advancing super quickly. You talk about the state of technology in 2023, and that feels like a geological epoch ago. When we're looking at the next 5 years, what do you think that holds for AI? What's the opportunity look like? And we'll start with you, Jacqueline.
So one of the ways that I'm thinking about agents and how we're going to be safely, responsibly implementing that technology into Clearbrief's core product is around making sure that lawyers feel comfortable with what the agent has access to, right? And also helping the human understand better what is happening with the tech behind the scenes. So my focus is always still this industry, going back to what we've been talking about, is about trust. When you hire a lawyer, you're expecting that they know exactly what's happening in this case. They've been intimately involved in writing the motions and the pleadings that are getting filed in their name. And honestly, your reputation is everything as a lawyer. If you file one brief that has this hallucination, that's going to have a big impact on your career and your livelihood. So I think it is quite different than other industries where mistakes, even minor mistakes, right? Where the case we were just talking about, those are essentially typos, and it is having a huge impact. So I think when we talk about agents and sort of trusting agents to go out and access different systems that have very sensitive data and execute operations, at Clearbrief, we're just being really thoughtful about what are lawyers going to accept when it comes to that? What are their InfoSec teams going to accept? So that's really some of the immediate term thinking that we're focused on.
Everyone's talking about agents, and of course, everyone has a different definition of agents. And we often think, as we have these conversations about the agents are what a large language model, you say, hey, I've got this goal, go out, create a business, create a trademark, sell a bunch of things, create a bank account, bring in money. If you have any questions, let me know, right? This is the kind of autonomous agents that we've been thinking about. We'll call those large language model agents, but we kind of have symbolic agents for in what's called expert systems like TurboTax for years. So to file a legal task is to file a tax return. And TurboTax said, what are all the things I need to think about in this? And they mapped those all out. And to the end user, both of these kind of seem like magic. And so we at VLEX, we have a combination of the symbolic agents as well as the large language model agents, where we say, if you upload a complaint, we do every single thing that I did for every single complaint as a litigator for 15 years. I would say, what are the claims being alleged? What are the facts supporting those claims? Who are the parties? What are some legal defenses? What are some questions I should ask my client to help them win? These are all symbolic because I say, I don't want the large language model to muck it up, because if I put it on this side, it's not going to ask all the things I need to know. So we need to code these things up, and we need to have agents do this work deterministically, therefore reliably. But then we also sprinkle some LLM pixie dust to say, okay, now that we have the core of the things that matter, large language model, what other tasks might be delightful to the user? And we sprinkle those in too. And then we have legal research questions that are customized to that complaint that the large language model brings them in. So I think as we think about agents, we often think about this side of the large language models just doing magical things. We should be thinking more about the deterministic side. What is the thing that I do for this matter every single time? Code those things up and sprinkle some LLM pixie dust. So as we think about where we're kind of rocket shipping up, this morning I watched a podcast from Dwarkesh Patel, who interviewed one of the co-founders of OpenAI. And he was talking about how he made predictions in 2023 that are remarkably prescient 2 years later. And now he says, okay, what's going to happen by 2027? He said that, in 2023 to 2025, we've just had maybe 10 years of progress in these last 2 years. And so he thinks between 25 and 27 on the large language model side, we might have 50 or 75 because large language models know how to code now. And once the large language models know how to code themselves, then you get an exponential growth in the capability of the foundational models that all three of us use in our products every single day. So as that intelligence rocket ships up, we are going to be the beneficiaries of that intelligence and be able to give that to the users who are going to be delighted by these things. So large language model agents, unreliable. Symbolic agents, totally reliable. Let's use both and ride the rocket ship of 10 years of growth in the next 2 years.
When you think about symbolic agents, it's almost, I hear you talking about a concept that is almost like blending what we might classically call automation and just figuring out ways we can deterministically automate certain tasks, which is a huge opportunity in most law offices where we're following a standard set of templates, checklists, documents. That it's really work you can templatize, automate. And then I love the term, sprinkle some LLM pixie dust on this, and you can have just incredible capabilities, especially when on the knee of the curve of this exponential capability we're going to see in the next couple of years.
That's right. When I was at Thomson Reuters, we would ask for people, for law firms, do you have a playbook? Do you have a standard way to do things? Because these are the people that are going to win. Because they say, this is the way I've done hundreds of these things before. These are the standards. And once you know those standards, you can symbolically code things up. And with large language models, that pixie dust is easier than ever.
I do think we need to remember, though, that a lot of firms, you still need the people and the humans who are going to be setting up the systems. And like I talked about before, like the pipeline of even getting the data into the right place so they could sprinkle the pixie dust and all that stuff. It requires humans being on board with this, wanting to change, wanting to do things faster and better. So I do think that legal isn't necessarily going to be immediately, changed overnight unless we can really galvanize the workforce and show them how does this improve your life? How does this improve your practice to do things differently and to use this technology? And from going to all the conferences that I go to, I still hear a lot of resistance. So it's pretty interesting since the folks who come to the conferences tend to be very tech forward and some of the most excited people about technology, but they are communicating that the people they work with are not necessarily ready to turn everything they do over to technology. So I think what the huge transformation that's happening with the tech, we have to also be putting as much effort and thoughtfulness into how can we make this human-centered? How do we train people? How do we bring them along and show them the why behind this technology?
And I think that bringing the people along is going to be the hardest part. People change is hard, even though technological change, we think the three of us is quite rapid. So bringing those people along, there's a saying that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. That is the listeners, the users are just heads down doing their work. And they're like, something's going on with AI, but I'm just doing my work down here. So as we think about there is a risk of you having your lunch being eaten by your competitors. and by the tools themselves. An example is that Fortune 100 company that I work with said, I used to use legal research tool X maybe 3 times a year, but I use Vincent many times a day. Every time I thought about calling a lawyer, I realized, oh, I'll just ask Vincent. Vincent gives me the cases, the statutes, and the regulations, gives me a really good answer. I hand out to the business person, say, if you need anything else, we'll call the lawyer. And the business person said, no, this is perfect. And the Fortune 100 company said, that lawyer doesn't know why the phone stopped ringing. They just didn't need to be rung. And so as you maybe see your calls shrink, you'll blame the economy. You'll blame, my competitor had a sweetheart deal with the client, but you won't know why the phone stopped ringing because the clients just don't need you. And because it's a hard conversation to say, I'm not hiring you because you're not using large language models. I, as an in-house counsel, don't want to tell you that. And if I am on the consumer side, I don't want to tell my lawyer, I just use ChatGPT to file my brief. I don't need you here. So there is a risk of stasis where the future is here. It's not evenly distributed, where you're not actually distributing, you're not on the cutting edge, and there's a risk of getting lost to your competitor or lost to the tools themselves. The clients just won't need you.
It's funny though, because we focus on litigators and also in-house teams, investigations teams, and who manage litigation and who may send, work to outside counsel. And what I hear from them is that, they will never do the work in-house when it comes to litigation. They just don't want to do it. They're going to always send that work to outside counsel. So I do think we might see differences in practice areas because there's just a certain stress level associated with certain types of work. But I think it's really interesting to look at that dynamic though between in-house teams. There is some interesting data showing that they're more often now putting in their outside counsel guidelines that you have to be using AI. And I'm talking about enterprise clients, right? The large global corporations. So then that means like sort of the mid-size and big law firms are facing that pressure. You have to use AI. Whereas the solo and small firms, their clients are not giving them, outside counsel guideline. They're just do it however you want to do it. So there may be sort of different pressures depending on your clients. But overall, I do see that being a helpful force for encouraging people to adopt AI. Another one is if the judges, if the arbitrators, right? Like I was mentioning the AAA partnership that we have, where the arbitrators are saying we're using Clearbrief, and actually we're asking all the parties in this arbitration to use Clearbrief. Okay, well, that senior partner who's never been asked to use a tech tool before, they're like, I got to learn this. I got to use this. So I think we need to look for those external pressures to help encourage people to upskill.
I agree. And litigation, there are lots of tasks within litigation. And, the in-house counsel is not going to be filing with the court, obviously, because they want external counsel to do that. But a lot of the preparatory things, a lot of the analysis, how valid is this legal lawsuit? So, for example, you can take with Vincent, you can upload a complaint, and we give you those $200, 200 hours of analyses in about a few minutes. And so we sell to the biggest law firms in the world. We also sell to the biggest corporations in the world. So Salesforce has said, in the old world, those 200 hours might take 3 or 4 weeks to be able to get those 200 hours. So then we could have more sophisticated conversations. He said, but today with Vincent, I can have those sophisticated conversations on day one. That is, before I even send the complaint to external counsel, I get the benefit of those 200 pages, which includes defenses, includes questions to be able to ask my client, that the business people, to be able to get it before I even call my lawyer in the first place. And then he said on day one, I could be able to say, what do you think about the fair use defense? I just found out that this thing is maybe going to do things. So yes, there is filing with the court, but there's so much legal work that is before the filing with the court. And I talk to corporations every day, Fortune 100 and lower, and they say, we're looking to bring external spend internal. So the more work that they can bring internal with tools like this, you what Darth Vaughn from Ford Motor Company says, you're going to use a large language model. If you're not, you're fired, or we're not going to hire you. Now that you've shrunk your costs, take that 200 hours and shrunk it down to 5 minutes, I'm going to give you more work. And that's what's called Jevons paradox. As you shrink the cost of it, I'm going to use more of you. So if you're a lawyer that is external, maybe you're getting less work. Maybe it's because your competitors are giving Ford what you're not giving them.
When we think about the long-term impacts of AI, and when I say long-term, I mean 4 or 5 years. But when you think about what this ultimately means for lawyers, what a lot of the conversations I'm sure that all of us have with lawyers, legal professionals more broadly is, I think even doses of excitement and fear around what this portends for their careers, and does it ultimately result in something that is creating more work, or is this something that is ultimately going to? And I think you put it in a really poignant way, in a kind of scary way, that the phone just stops ringing and you don't quite know why. Is this ultimately shrinking the demand for lawyers to do legal work?
I'll give a less scary vision of um, lawyers will be challenged to become better business people. Because if you're a good business person, you don't just sit back and just keep doing things the way you've always been doing them. You have your ear to the ground, and you're talking to your clients, and you're kind of assessing the market to figure out, okay, this type of offering that I'm doing for legal services, it's not getting as many bites as it used to. How can I shift what I'm offering? How can I pitch my clients differently? How can I market myself as being a future ready lawyer? And a lot of lawyers haven't had to be great business people. And it's not necessarily something they teach us in law school. So I think that's an opportunity that if law firms start really embracing this as part of their identity as a firm, that's where they're going to be on, ahead of their competitors. That's where they're going to be getting a steady stream of work because they're already anticipating the needs of their clients.
I think that there's two future worlds, and which future world we end up with, no one knows. One future world is the current one partner to four associate ratio, which is most law firms in the world, shrinks to 1 to 3, to 1 to 2, to 1 to 1, to one partner, one matter, because you don't need that associate to do the 200 hours worth of work. You just upload it, and then I get the answers, and I get to maybe I don't need the associates. That's scary world number one that I hope we don't go down. Better world number two is you keep the associates and have those associates have their large language model associates underneath them to do that work faster, better, stronger. So you can imagine if that associate uploads it to Vincent and then gets the 200 hours worth, then I as a partner need to oversee them less because I already know that the large language model partner has already validated that that case is actually correct and has already validated that these are actually pretty good. Now, once in the second world, think about the cool things that can happen. You can now steal market share from your competitors. Because they're not running as fast as you are. So you steal market share from your competitors. And there's also 92% of legal needs that are unmet because we lawyers are too expensive. What if we shrink that cost and go down market? Saying those associates with their large language models associates can serve that 92% at a much lower price point than I as a partner can. And we can now eat into this market. And people would call that 92%, economists would call that a latent market that is just waiting to be exploited. And so if you think about, we currently have a current, several $100 billion worth of legal market today. If we go down that 92%, that turns to $1 trillion or more legal market. And that's Jevons paradox again. We've shrunk the unit cost, therefore we can serve that 92%. So I hope we don't go down path number one, where we just fire all the associates. We have a few partners left, and then when they die, the profession goes away, right? I hope we go down path number two, where we eat our competitors' lunch and go down market to serve access to justice.
I was just going to say, you don't even need to focus on eating your competitor's lunch. There's so much of that latent demand. You just need to think, how do I innovatively price, package, deliver my services? And yeah, the worldwide legal spend today on that 8% of service demand is $800 billion a year. Tapping into that latent legal market is $1 trillion opportunity for lawyers that are thinking entrepreneurially. How do I leverage AI to be more efficient, to be faster, and to maybe have the freedom also to walk away from the billable hour, offer a more predictable pricing package for my clients? I think it's truly an exciting opportunity, and maybe I lean towards the more optimistic scenario you outlined, in the sense that I can't see, with that amount of latent demand, how we start shrinking, the number of workers until we've really exhausted that demand. And there's just so much opportunity there.
And I'm glad you mentioned the billable hour, because a way that we can have this optimistic second world is by maybe saying that the current 90% of billable hour work, through the efficiency of large language models, shrink that 90% to 80% to 70% to 60%, to land to right around the 30%, which is what the big four accounting firms do. They only do the most unpredictable things as hourly, but the 70 to 90% of work is flat fee. And so as we figure out how to processize, how to productize our work and do it faster, better, stronger, then we can go from the billable hour to the flat fee or contingency fee, which we've had for decades. And contingency fee lawyers know, if I shrink the amount of time, I make more money. If I shrink my costs, I increase my profit margins. That's true for, there's an old joke that the slowest lawyer wins the race, right? If you spend 10 hours on a thing that I spend 1 hour on, you make more money than I do. That's true for hourly, but it's not true for contingency fee. They spend less time, they make more money. Also true, not true for flat fee. They would spend less time, they make more money. Also not true for subscription fee, that if you do this more time. Success fee, also not true. In-house counsel, also not true. Government lawyers, also not true. For each one of these, there's more time than there's more work than there is time.
And there's a productivity imperative.
That's right.
Right.
I spend less time on it, I make more money, I spend less cost. So slowest lawyer wins the race is only true for hourly. It's not true for these other paradigms. So the winners are going to be people that say, I'm going to shrink the percentage of hourly billing. I don't think it's going to go away completely, but shift over to these other where efficiencies actually make me more money. That's where the winners are going to end up.
There's also, I think, a unique aspect having to do with the authority and expertise. And one of the reasons that you hire a lawyer that charges very high rates is because they have better insights. They're going to win. They're going to have creative ways of approaching the case. And so I think if we can also, it's not just about how we price and doing everything faster, but more that, okay, if we do certain tasks in this case more efficiently, then there's more time to really focus and go slower on other parts of this matter so that we're developing a new insight. And maybe I'm reading, I had a story of when I was practicing where I had filed, my appellate brief and it was already done and filed. And then I happened to be reading some recent U.S. Supreme Court opinion that came out. And I had this idea that, oh, maybe something in here actually really changes and impacts the case. And so I filed a motion to provide supplemental authority. And we ended up winning on that theory from this new case that came in. And if you don't kind of have the time in your practice to be looking for those creative opportunities, you could miss your chance to win and develop your authority and develop your expertise in the industry. So I think that's another lens that might be more palatable in some ways for those firms that are really focused on their reputation and not just doing things as fast as they can. It's about making the time to go slow and get those insights.
Right. And maybe building on that observation, Jackie, when we think about the what makes a great lawyer today versus what will make a great lawyer in 3 or 4 years, where they're really leveraging AI. AI is maybe automating large parts of their practice, but they need to maybe shine in different ways than they are today. What are your perspectives on how lawyers need to think about evolving what their strengths are, where AI is maybe consuming more and more of what used to be their traditional job? We'll start with you, Jacqueline.
Yeah, one thing that I will just point out that I'm seeing that I love, that I'm really excited about is the folks that we're working with at law firms who tend to be the ones reaching out, learning Clearbrief, leading the charge at their firm to implement Clearbrief. I see them getting promoted. They are getting promoted and they are being given opportunities at their firm that others who are kind of just sitting on the sidelines are not getting.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very clear trend that if you empower yourself at your firm to be the tech forward person, that's going to help your career. So I don't know about even, 10 years into the future, do this now and you will get great opportunities coming to you.
It gives you a superpower, right?
It does, because most people are not looking up. They're not necessarily looking up and seeing how they could do things differently. And so if you become that person who is making it easy for others, bringing that information to them so that they can easily incorporate it into their work, into the firm, that's hugely valuable to the business. So it's kind of back to that discussion of being a good business person. It's really just about recognizing, hey, I should seize this moment to differentiate myself and kind of brand myself as a tech forward person and tech forward lawyer.
And as we think about, the technology eating more of legal work, people see a brief being put out, quickly with Clearbrief or quickly with Vincent. They realize, my God, I make widgets and these widgets are getting eaten by technology a lot. And what future do I have? But what they realize is the client's not hiring you for the widget. What the client's hiring you is for peace of mind. To say, I'm a lawyer, I've got your back. You are in good hands with me. You're going to be fine. They're not buying the widget. They're not buying the document. They're buying that peace of mind. And so as we think about large language models cranking out the widgets more quickly than ever, through your tool, through my tool, a lot of that, we'll call it, we do a lot of thinking as lawyers and we do a lot of thunking as lawyers, a lot of drudgery, right? And so the large language models are going to do a lot of that thunking, leaving us only for the thinking and for the humanity of saying, I've got your back.
Mm-hmm.
You hire me because you are going through the worst time of your life. I'm going to help you through this. And so as we think about what did we train people to do in the past? We trained them to make widgets. We train them less on being good humans. And we, as lawyers, truly are counselors. We counsel our clients and being able to say, you've got a risk. I'm going to help you mitigate that risk, whether it's transactional risk or litigation risk or advisory risk. I'm here for you. So I think law schools need to really focus on that humanity. I think that lawyers, we've always been salespeople, but we don't like to call ourselves salespeople. We call ourselves rainmakers because that doesn't make it seem like salespeople. But the best salespeople say, hey, I can help you. You've got some really scary times in here. I've got your back.
They're problem solvers.
They're problem solvers. And so really, as we think about, we don't make widgets, we sell trust and we mitigate risk. So the more future facing lawyers that realize that, they're going to make more money and they're going to be able to have people trust them more.
Yeah, Damien, you make a great point. I think there's an opportunity to be more human than ever with the benefits of AI. I remember at ClioCon a few years ago, Seth Godin was speaking, and Seth Godin's obviously, for anyone that doesn't know him, a marketing genius, but his whole family is lawyers. But he talked about the fact that nobody wakes up in the morning with a billable hour problem. They wake up in the morning with a problem and they want somebody to help them work through that problem. And I think lawyers being able to really move up the value chain, I think in the same way that accountants did with the advent of the spreadsheet in the 70s. They became partners to their business partners more than it ever been before. Maybe for our listeners that want to dig into AI, understand what's possible, and start making some practical changes to how their law firm is running, what would you recommend for resources? Jacqueline, go ahead.
Sure. Probably the simplest one that I'd recommend is to start being super online on LinkedIn. So at this point on LinkedIn, I've curated the accounts that I follow, and LinkedIn is always recommending additional things that I might want to look at. And I do honestly get inspiration all the time. One of the folks I really recommend is Ethan Mollick. He's a Wharton professor who posts every time a new model comes out. And so if you just kind of want to know what how the winds are shifting, that's really helpful to sort of follow along. And as you do that, you'll sort of gain this fluency in understanding, I think, the basics. But I would also just really recommend making sure that at your firm, you are deputizing somebody to be experimenting with technology. You are giving them some space in their schedule to understand and learn about security and privacy and the kind of standard baseline you need to know to implement these tools at your firm. And I think you'll see results if you make sure that someone is focused on it. I think as a business, you will see the results over the next few months.
I second the Ethan Mollick. He's amazing. He's the Wharton School of Business professor that talks about business and what are lawyers but business people after all. So I second Ethan is amazing. He's written a book that I recommend to everyone called Co-Intelligence. It was written, I think, in late 24, but it's still equally applicable today. So follow Ethan. The second thing, and how do I use large language models, is kind of like asking, what book should I read to learn how to swim? You can't read a book to learn how to swim. You need how to swim. Just swim. And so I have a friend who has a Post-it note on his monitor, and it says, can AI help with this? Because it probably can. So every single task that you do that you dread or takes too much time, can AI help with this? And then you say, what tool can I use to be able to help it? Maybe ChatGPT that's free, as we talked about, probably not going to be very good. $20 a month, probably going to be better, but also going to hallucinate cases, right? And then, I like it when my customers say, we tried these other legal research AI tools whose names that I'm not going to say. And I like it when they've tried them and then they tried Vincent and then like, my God, this is heads and tails above everyone else. So try the free, try the $20 a month, try competitors, and then go to Vincent and get a 3-day free trial and realize that this is not ChatGPT. This is a focused on lawyer thing that can be able to, can AI help with this? Yes, it can. Use the free things and then upgrade.
Amazing. Well, Damien, Jackie, thanks so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Likewise.
It was so fun.
This is so great to be in Chicago and so great to talk to you.
Likewise. My biggest takeaway from our conversation was the shift from trust but verify to trust and verify. As Jacqueline and Damien pointed out, the goal of these tools isn't to replace the lawyer's judgment, but to provide the pixie dust of efficiency that allows us to focus on the high-level strategy and human connection our clients truly value. If you enjoyed this episode of Matters, please subscribe wherever you listen to your shows. I'm Jack Newton, and thanks for listening to Matters.